I've been asked about this tie. There's been some crude remarks during the day, which I genially tossed aside. This tie came from the laundry across the street over there. It was hanging there. I said, "Did that come from a cadaver?" And they said, "Yes." And there was a story that went with it. It was an Irish wake, this tie, and an Irish wake is much like my part in the evening's activities. The cadaver was a very important part of the vital part of the ceremony, but had very little to say. That's my role here tonight. And so the tie is grotesque, but it was $9. So now Dan Schnur is here to introduce the governor, but I just had to say a word. Pete Wilson and I served together in the United States Senate. A wonderful friend, a gutsy guy, got great spirit, great energy, and great directness. And he and his wife Gail became close friends with Ann and with me. The memory that never leaves is we wheeled him in on a gurney at 2 a.m. in the morning to vote on a vote to freeze the federal budget and get rid of 13 agencies of the government. It was called the Grassley, Kassebaum, and some other names. It was we did get a bipartisan vote, one Democrat, and that was the day, the evening, the morning that we wheeled Pete in, and there he was, and it was I shan't forget that. But more than that, a good legislator, a tough former ex-Marine, and he's needed all that in public life. In public life, you got to have a pretty good, tough skin, and you have to carry out some things that are politically unpopular. But that's Pete, and a lovely friend he is. Dan Schnur, we're glad to have him here. Pete, he's currently a fellow. I'm introducing him at this moment. A fellow at the Institute of Politics. His study group is held Tuesdays at 4. Titled California, Where Tomorrow's Policies Happen Today. How's that for a title? That a dazzler? Better than yours was. He is the former director of communications for the governor of California, former communications director for the California Republican Party. He has served as a political analyst and a commentator for many California radio stations and newspapers, and has become a very fine addition to the Fellows program. And I introduce Dan Schnur. Please, Dan.
Oh, thank you very much, Alan Simpson, both for that nice introduction and also for allowing me to be part of tonight's program. I'd also like to thank all of you for attending the forum this evening, both for turning out to hear somebody who's been so important to my life, but also to help me repay a debt to that person as well. You see, 6 years ago, I was asked by a friend of mine who wrote for the Los Angeles Times if Governor Wilson would be willing to speak to the night school class that he taught at Santa Monica Community College. And of course, the governor agreed to do it. So Governor, here we are 6 years later. We've gone from Santa Monica College Night School to the Kennedy School Forum at Harvard. We've come a long way, haven't we, boss? Being governor of the largest and the most culturally diverse state in the nation presents special challenges to those who assume that position. And so Pete Wilson is the only governor in this country, as far as I know, whose favorite meal is a kosher burrito with a side order of kimchi. And he's the only leader on the American political landscape who can quote with confidence both from the works of Churchill and from Chumbawamba. And if you think I'm kidding, just wait for a couple of minutes. I'd like to introduce the governor by talking briefly about something on which I think all of us in this room can agree, that being the tremendous importance of public service, of giving something back to our community. Pete Wilson has served his community for more than 3 decades as a member of the California State Assembly, as the mayor who helped transform San Diego from a sleepy Navy town into one of America's largest, greatest, and most beautiful cities, as a member of the United States Senate, where he served for most of the 1980s with Alan Simpson, and as the governor who brought California out of its worst recession since the Great Depression and turned it into an economic juggernaut that now leads the nation and the world in job creation. But what was most impressive to me during the time I worked for Pete Wilson was his commitment to the subject that he'll be addressing tonight, to the well-being of California's children. When Pete Wilson was first elected governor, he spoke of preventive government, a government based on the old adage that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And even through a nasty recession and through miserable budget fights, he maintained that commitment to prenatal care and to neonatal care, to Head Start and to Healthy Start, and to the kind of education reforms that he'll be talking with you about this evening. Now, those of you who are students at the Kennedy School, and those of you at the college who've been spending time at the Institute of Politics, you understand the allure and the importance of public service. And what inspired me to stay in public service is sitting on the stage here tonight. Every one of you, whether you're a liberal or a conservative, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, every one of you thinking about getting yourself involved in politics or government or some form of public service, every one of you deserves the opportunity to work for an individual or for a cause who you can completely and wholeheartedly devote yourself. And it doesn't matter if that person is Pete Wilson or Bill Clinton or Newt Gingrich or Al Gore. The important thing is to find a way to devote yourself to public service and to find someone or something to inspire you toward that service. Toward that end, I've had the very good fortune to find that person, this person, very early in my career. I exaggerate only slightly when I say that I would run through brick walls for Pete Wilson. I would crawl across broken glass for this man. And I hope that at some point in each of your own careers of public service, that you'll have the same good fortune that I've had to work on behalf of an individual who you feel as strongly about as I feel about our guest. So with that, on behalf of all of us here at the Kennedy School, for whom public service is and continues to be a noble calling, please join me in welcoming tonight's speaker, the Governor of California, the Honorable Pete Wilson.
Are there any questions? My God, Dan, after that, I feel as though I should simply stand up here and let you all gaze upon me for a while. I don't know about you, Al, but I'm impressed. You know too much. By the way, $9? You were overcharged. The evening in question, to which Senator Simpson has alluded, was occasioned by my coming in to be the one who gave George Bush the excruciating pleasure of casting the tie-breaking vote. A vote that he remembered long after because everyone reminded him, but it was my vote that tied it that made it possible for the Vice President to break the tie. I do want to dispel a vicious Democratic canard. It is not true that that was my third emergency appendectomy. I am told that not too long before my arrival, Congressman Gephardt was here and gave my speech. No, I'm told that he was very hard on the Clinton administration, and of course I would never do anything so unbecoming as that. I'm not too sure that he'd be very interested, though, in my presidential advice. Matter of fact, most people aren't. There's a reason I fear. I was in and out of the last one so quickly. I received a note from Cadet Shannon Faulkner bragging that she had lasted longer at the Citadel. I thought that was a little unnecessary. And I must admit, while I totally trust Dan, I had some trepidation coming before a Harvard audience. My first experience in doing so was right after I was elected mayor of San Diego. The very first invitation I received was from the Harvard Club of San Diego. They were then paying the mayor of San Diego the munificent sum of $12,000 per year. Some thought it was overpaid, but in any case, I went and was assured as I received a warm welcome from my host that evening, that his audience could not wait to see me and hear me because they were fascinated to have with them a living example of how a Yale education and a law degree could win a salary of $12,000 per year. I'm not sure whether that was part of the inspiration for this evening's invitation. In any case, it's been 35 years now since the presidency of John F. Kennedy ended. On Valentine's Day in 1963, President Kennedy said, "The future promise of any nation can be directly measured by the present prospect of its youth." He was essentially echoing Plato, who in the Republic instructs us that, quote, "The direction in which education starts a man will determine his future life." Now, neither of those from such eminent sources may strike you as particularly profound. They may seem to you rather obvious, and so they should, because that is indeed the role that we have assigned to education, all of us. We could, I think, almost stipulate to that universally. But it does require from time to time that we take a look at education to determine what the prospect of our youth is, what kind of adults our youth will become, what direction their education will take them. California is a place where new ideas often surface. 2 years ago, we had a strenuous debate on a subject that I'm sure attracted attention all across the nation. It had to do with preferences in public hiring, public employment, public contracting, and public education. Preferences based upon race and gender. Some of you, I think, know that I took a leading role with my friend, the very courageous Ward Connerly, in opposing those preferences and calling for an elimination from them on the part of state government. The thing that was lost in that, I think we should concentrate on tonight. You probably all know, if you haven't read or heard, that my view and his view is that essentially those preferences are wrong. They are fundamentally wrong. They're morally wrong, I think, because whatever the good intentions that inspired them, the translated goals into actual quotas, inevitably what happened was that they became unfair and inescapably divisive. But beyond that, and this is the point that we should concentrate on tonight, they're a cop-out. They're a cop-out for the heavy lifting that we must do if we are to discharge the obligation that we have as a just, a caring, and a wise society to assure that every child of every ethnicity in every community in California, and for that matter across America, has the chance, the full chance, to be all that he or she can be. And that doesn't occur simply because at the end of the process of secondary education, someone comes aggressively recruiting, seeking you, and says, even though you're not quite prepared, we are going to accept you in preference to someone who is in fact demonstrably better qualified. That's what this fight was all about. And what I say to you is that what we need to have is a merit-based system, but what's wrong is that we are still very far from realizing that ideal, that goal that must in fact be achieved of seeing to it that every child of every ethnicity in every community has the kind of health care and the kind of quality education to fulfill all of their God-given promise. That's what was left out of the debate on 209. And it is very real. It is very necessary that we look at it. And frankly, it's long overdue. Because we have traditionally in America, and in other societies as well, valued education as the means of self-improvement, the means to provide upward mobility, the means to come to a better life, the means to embrace far expanded opportunity. Well, let's look at what is actually occurring in the real world. In my state, where we have an economy that is extraordinary, we have recovered, we have come rebounding back California is now the 7th largest economy in the world. Last year, we crossed the threshold of a $1 trillion economy. To put things in perspective, that distinction was not enjoyed by the United States until 1970. More to the point, when I go on trade missions, usually California's economy substantially exceeds that of the countries that we were visiting. About a year ago, I was visited by the Canadian ambassador to the United States, a charming fellow. As he sat down opposite me, he grinned and he said, "Governor," he said, "I just want you to know that we in Canada are very grateful that California is not a separate nation." I said, "Really, why is that?" He said, "Well, not only have you a larger population, but a significantly larger economy, and if in fact California were a separate nation, you'd bump Canada from the G7. I told him to relax. I had given up most of my thoughts of secession after the base closures. For that, I think we might elect him. The point is, we have an economy that is now producing not only hundreds of thousands of new jobs every year, roughly 400,000 plus, nearer to 500,000 in 97. They are very good jobs, better than most that we lost in the recession. There is a problem. The problem is that along with a tax structure and eliminating regulatory excess, dealing with a predatory legal system, dealing with all the other elements of a healthy business and investment environment, there's something fundamentally required if you're going to have the kind of jobs that we need, and that is a skilled, educated workforce. Not long ago, executives from Silicon Valley went to Washington to testify before a House committee, urging fervently that Congress not reduce the quotas for legal immigration into the United States. Why? Because they were dependent upon foreign, educated, skilled labor in order to produce the products of the 21st century. That, my friends, is a hell of a commentary upon my state's educational system. They were saying we cannot find the people with the skills, with the education necessary for us to continue producing in accordance with all the volume of orders that we have. Recently, we have all read on the front pages of virtually every newspaper in America about the appalling scores of our 12th graders compared with European students taking the same examinations in math and physical sciences. Not too long ago, Californians were shocked by the fact that fourth grade reading scores, fourth grade, were appallingly low. In fact, I believe that we were tied with Louisiana for last place. That makes no sense. Why has that occurred? Is it because of funding? When I was running for the office of governor in 1990, the budget for education in the state of California was about $25 billion. Today it's about $40 billion. The questions that I want you to focus on tonight with me are not just how much we're spending. The question is important. In fact, you must spend. But it isn't simply a question of how much, it's how you spend it. And that is critical. When I ran for this office, looking at an investment of $25 billion per year, I thought it is an investment. It is not something that we can begrudge. Traditionally, historically, it has been the major investment made by state government, and we've always thought it a good one because we were, in fact, investing in the future. It is simply that the return on the investment is not nearly what it ought to be. And if any of you have been involved with manufacturers of interesting new products, ask your friend who's in that business, would you dare to bring to market a new product that you had not set rigorous standards to produce, and would you do so without engaging in rigorous testing to see that your product met those standards? It's called quality control. And yet, with an investment of $25 billion. California's educational system had no quality control. There were no standards, other than those assigned by individual schools or districts, but certainly nothing on a statewide basis. Beyond that, there was no testing. If there had been standards, we wouldn't have known whether kids were meeting them or not, whether teachers were meeting them, because there was no testing. Indeed, there was a prohibition in the law, in something called the Stull Act, that said that teachers may not be evaluated on the basis of their students' test scores on standardized tests. Well, obviously, something was needed in the way of reform. And I will simply tell you that the needed reforms are both obvious and that they have been strenuously resisted by two groups. First, by those within the State Department of Education and those in some of the graduate education departments at our universities, our state colleges, who feel somehow that it is wrong to burden children with the heavy duty of memorizing things like multiplication tables. They don't think that we should teach reading by the old method called phonics. They think that spelling is not terribly important, and in fact indulge students in what they encourage them in what they call creative spelling. Creative spelling. Creative spelling, we used to get an F. Similarly, they don't think that people should be required to know a great deal specifically about history, that they don't really need to know when certain events happened, whether one came first or the other, whether the Magna Carta was before the Civil War or the other way around. They probably don't think it's important that those studying chemistry have committed to memory the properties of various chemical elements, or that people know anything about the laws of physics, or be able to prove and remember the proof of geometric theorems. They think that that's unnecessary. Well, they're wrong. Some of you, I'm sure, have read the works of E.D. Hirsch, Jr., who believes that IQ is not simply a function of native intelligence, but of how much you've actually learned. And he has this quaint notion that by going to school and acquiring knowledge, you actually provide a broader foundation upon which to gain greater knowledge. Quaint notion. He's right, but there are a lot of people who fight that, and we've had knockdown, drag-out fights in hearings where we have sought to adopt needed standards. But then the second group that has resisted reform and resisted strenuously has been the California Teachers Association, the teachers union. Some of you may have read that we have in better times now invested substantially in reducing class sizes. Now, by the end of this coming summer, we are reasonably confident that in virtually every kindergarten, first, second, and third grade in California, children will be taught in classes numbering no more than 20 students. And the purpose of that is simple, it is obvious. It is to afford teachers the opportunity to give the kind of individualized instruction that is the best guarantee that we can think of to assure proficient readers by the end of grade 3. An Orange County superintendent, high school superintendent, told me if kids aren't proficient readers by the end of grade 3, their high school will be a failure. It is the gateway skill that shapes all the rest of a child's educational experience. Now, having said that, you would think that there'd be pretty much universal acceptance of the desirability of reducing class sizes. When I first put money into the budget a couple of years ago, it was to provide the financing for 2 grades of class size reduction. The schools could decide which of the grades between kindergarten and the 3rd grade they would select. Most chose the 1st grade and the 2nd. In spring of that same year, I might say, while ads were playing, sponsored by the California Teachers Association, about $1 million television ad campaign, urging, guess what, class size reduction, I was told by the majority party in the legislature that a tax cut that I was proposing was dead on arrival. We needn't linger long on that. I will just tell you that I said, in that case, the money that we were going to spend for that purpose, we will spend instead to finance a third grade of class size reduction. Before that, I had heard, it had come back to me that let him know he can have one grade, not two, of class size reduction. Why? Why would an organization running television spots urging class size reduction say only one when in fact there was money in the budget for two? There isn't a very good explanation on the record, but unhappily, as I was told by any number of people, it is because they wanted the money simply to go out unearmarked to the districts where it could go on the bargaining table. Now, let me say, teachers are very important people. They have a huge responsibility. They can make an enormous beneficial difference. They deserve to be well paid, not just decently, but competitively paid. And in fact, we do that in California. But I will also say that I was disappointed, to put it mildly. I was really shocked. And when in fact we said there will be 3 grades of class size reduction this next year as we pass this budget, what happened was that in fact they broke cover. There were 15 lobbyists camped in the office of the Democratic President Pro Tem of the State Senate. Assemblyman Pacheco is familiar with this. And for about a day and a half, he defended their opposition to expanding class size reduction. They made the argument that, no, this is irresponsible, it's too much too soon, we can't hire the teachers, we can't find the classroom space. The interesting thing was, I didn't hear that from a single superintendent. I didn't hear that from teachers, I didn't hear it from principals. What I heard from them was, do it, earmark it, so that it can't be spent for anything else, because it may require that we scramble a little to find the teachers and to find the space, but do it because it's the most important educational reform possible. We did do it, but it was over the resistance of an organization that presumably exists for the benefit of educating children. Then last year, I insisted, at the price of there being no budget for a while, that we have a single statewide standardized test. Why? Obviously, so parents and teachers and employers and students can know what students are learning and what teachers are teaching. Because without that, there is no basis for comparison, and without that, there is not the kind of accountability that's necessary. And accountability is what has been lacking in public education. It isn't simply that it is a monopoly, which it is, and I would think many in this room would agree with me that the consumer generally benefits from a little competition. More about that later. The fact of the matter is that while there are magnificent teachers, dedicated, skilled teachers, the vast majority, I would be happy to say, they do not feel, in many cases, that their union reflects their views, and thank God it doesn't. They feel that many of the things that we are trying to do are necessary. Let me give you some more examples. We got the test in the very closing moments, literally, of the legislative session. It was at about 7 o'clock on a Saturday morning. We'd been there all night. And to her very great credit, a young woman, a Democrat from Marin County, Carrie Mazzoni, the chairman of the Education Committee in the Assembly, fought off her fellow Democrats, resisted the intense battering that she was getting from the teachers' union, who were trying their utmost to defeat that single statewide standardized test. It really does not make sense in any respect except that they are seeking to avoid accountability. That is not fair to the students, it is not fair to the parents, and it's not fair to the employers or to the taxpayers. Merit pay, a concept that I'm sure is well understood by you. Recognizing outstanding performance and giving added compensation as recognition. It is vehemently opposed by the teachers' union. Why is that? It is because the union has become the stout, militant defender of egalitarian mediocrity, and they are resisting vehemently accountability. We also think that if you're going to have a good school, there are two really very fundamental ingredients. There should be parents involved and empowered to work with a strong principal. That way, they will see to it that, in fact, their children learn, that the teachers teach. What I will tell you is that there is need for further reform than we've achieved. And, in fact, herein lies the tale of two initiatives. One that will be on the ballot, I hope, in November, and one that is already on the ballot this June. The first of these I will discuss is the one for November. It's called the Permanent Class Size Reduction and Educational Opportunity Act of 1998. It is an initiative. As you know, the initiative is a remedy for legislative default. Al and I know about legislative default. We've participated in a lot of it. I thought that was a better line, you know. The fact of the matter is, what we are seeking to do is to make permanent the funding for class size reduction, because right now we have to rely on annual budget language. Candidly, I am not that trusting. I think we need a continuous appropriation in the law. We also need to do something about the quality of teaching. We have recently discovered, a newspaper discovered in a survey, that in better than half the classrooms in California in which mathematics or physical sciences are being taught, they are being taught by an instructor who has not even minored in the subject that he or she is teaching. So this initiative will instead now require as a condition of being credentialed that you pass a subject matter competency examination and prepare a portfolio of lesson plans in the subject that you are expected to teach. It is not enough simply to sit through hours of pedagogical technique. People who are good teachers care about the kids, about their students, and about the subject. That's what makes it interesting to the students. We also feel that parents should be empowered and encouraged to work with the principals by a device that will be created in this initiative. It's called a Site Management Council. It's a very simple idea. Some of you know about charter schools, something else the union opposes. What we are seeking to do is to create at each school what we call a Site Management Council. It will consist of parents elected by parents, teachers elected by teachers. The parents will have a 2-to-1 majority. They will work with the principal on the budget, on the money that is received by that individual school from the school district. They will be empowered. They will work on the curriculum consistent with state standards. And the principal, a strong principal, will be empowered not only to recognize and reward good teachers, but to remove those that just aren't cutting it. And that, my friends, is long overdue. We're going to borrow an idea from the British. About 10 years ago, they created an office called Her Majesty's Chief Inspector of Schools. Her Majesty's Chief Inspector visits schools, ranks them according to the quality of instruction they provide, and then publishes the rankings, which has had the predictable effect of stimulating a great amount of effort and activity to improve the quality of instruction, to improve the rankings, because parents somehow get grumpy when they see their child's school far down on the list. It is called, again, accountability. The question may arise now, how have all of these reforms been defeated? How is it that those who have opposed them have done so successfully and held off reform for so long? And the better question is, how can we, the public, as parents, as employers, as taxpayers, as teachers, how can we be assured that we will in fact obtain those needed reforms to rescue public education in America? Well, the answer depends first on your remembering two things. The first is that almost all of this reform requires legislative action. And the second is that, in fact, the teachers' union has controlled the legislature for very many years, and they have done it by the simple device of amassing an enormous political war chest from which they make contributions that has allowed them to elect a majority of those sympathetic to their desires and to thereafter appeal to them quite convincingly, to those people whom they have elected who are eager to be reelected and to receive new contributions. That is an unfortunate situation. And of course, the reason that they are able to do so, that the union has that kind of financial clout, is because of a device that some of you may recognize when I name it as Chekhov. That's not an obscure Russian playwright. It is a device for extracting involuntary contributions from rank and file members of any union, including the teachers' union. It is the law in California, and we hope to change it. About 2 centuries ago, a man named Thomas Jefferson said that it was sinful and tyrannical to take a man's money and spend it to propagate ideas that he disbelieved. He was absolutely right. It also has the effect, I must say, of having stalled needed reforms that have crippled education, that have shortchanged too many kids for too many years. We've got to prevent that. Now, I'm aware that you're eager to ask questions. I'm also mindful of the fact that one can wear out one's welcome. My father, years ago, sent me a little anecdote. He said a neighbor of his had sent it to him. He wanted to share it with me. It was right after he'd heard one of my maiden speeches in the legislature. It was the report of a little girl in the 4th grade whose class had been shown a video on ancient Greek civilization. Afterwards, the teacher asked for a brief essay, a paragraph. This child had gotten an A. She had written, Socrates was an old Greek. He talked a lot. The other Greeks poisoned him.
Peter, thank you very much.
Let me conclude. Let me just conclude by inviting a question on opportunity scholarships. And let me share with you an experience I've had recently, because opportunity scholarships are vouchers. They are an effort to rescue poor kids trapped in the worst of the performing schools. It is morally indefensible that children of high native intelligence are being shortchanged, are truly being prevented from becoming all that they can be because they are in schools that do not allow them to really fulfill themselves. That is not something I think we can tolerate. About a week ago, I was privileged to watch and to listen to Stephen Hawking give a brilliant lecture. As you know, he is totally dependent to express himself upon a voice synthesizer that is firmly attached to his wheelchair. It was a brilliant performance. And through the evening, I couldn't help thinking to myself many times, my God, what a tragedy it would be if the technology did not exist in this man's lifetime to permit him to express the brilliance of that intellect. It would be a criminal waste of that talent if it were imprisoned in his mind and he were unable to share it with the world. Well, I would suggest to you that there is not an inapt parallel between a lot of kids. How many other Hawkings there may be, God knows. Perhaps not many, but some. And if they are being prevented from becoming all that they can be, and the world is being deprived of their intelligence, their creativity, then I say that's terribly wrong. The United Negro College Fund for 50 years has been reminding us a mind is a terrible thing to waste. So I say we are entitled to insist upon those reforms, and we've got to fight for them. If we do, we will make real the dream of the immigrant parent who has sought the better life for his child through education and the native-born American in the inner city who is being cheated by a school in which he is trapped solely because of the economic means of his parents. That's not fair, not to that child, not to America. My friends, let's change it. Let us insist on the reforms. Let us fulfill the promise of American education, rescue those kids. America will be a healthier, more prosperous, more just place, worthy of the description with justice for all. Thank you.
Governor Wilson, my name is David Orr, and I'm a freshman at Harvard College. My question is about state standards for education. Does your support for state standards translate into support for federal standards for education and also for equalizing funding of different school districts?
We have equalization of funding in California. The question about testing, I have an objection to a national test that is purely a voluntary benchmark. But I would not want it to be a mandate upon the states. Frankly, we intend to have a better standard.
Yes, I'm an undergrad. I'm up here.
Oh, yes, sir.
I think it's rather indisputable that certain ethnic groups have differed significantly in their scores on standardized tests, both across the state of California and in the nation. And I'm wondering if you could comment on what the failures of the California school systems have been to provide equal sort of education across racial boundaries, and if it hasn't been a failure, to what do you attribute those differences in scores?
Well, I think it has been a failure. That was my point. That's why I think that, and typically the worst of the unperforming schools have been in the inner cities. I think minority children, as well as others, have been shortchanged, and that is what I think is indefensible. That is why I have urged opportunity scholarships, initially a broader program. Now I am trying to at least get them to go for a pilot program. It is wrong, simply because I, as a parent, lack the economic means to provide my child with a better educational alternative, that child remains trapped in that school. That is not defensible. The result, I think, has been that public education in California is erratic in quality. In some of the schools, it is superb. In others, I think the kids are being cheated, shortchanged. And that really is not right. What we have to guarantee is genuine equality of access to opportunity. We can't guarantee the result, but we can guarantee the access, the equality of access to opportunity, and we're not doing it. And we're not doing it not because we're not equalizing funds, but because of the fact that there are basic reforms that have not held the system accountable. And incidentally, when people say, trust me, or trust the system, the same system that has created this mess, they're now being asked to trust it, to fix itself, and to waste the precious learning experience, the time of their children. You know, if you're on death row and they say, what do you want? You say strawberries, they say it's out of season. You say, fine, I'll wait. That's not the case when you're spending somebody else's time, the precious learning time of youngsters trapped in bad schools.
Yes, Governor. My name is Bradley Davis, and I'm the Vice President of the Harvard Republican Club, and on behalf of Republicans on campus, welcome. But you mentioned a June initiative that was coming up in June in California. This is my understanding. This deals with bilingual education. And since California is certainly a diverse population, as you mentioned, I wonder if you could share with us your thoughts on the best way to educate the children of immigrants who are coming in and do not speak English just fluently yet.
Well, I think I agree with the Latino parents who were surveyed by the Los Angeles Times, who about 75% of whom said that they wanted their children instructed in English just as early as possible. And I think the experience of other societies has indicated that immersion is usually the best way to gain not only an earlier fluency, but a real fluency. The Israelis, when they were seeking to build a country and seeking immigrants from literally the world over, had as their first step, whether you were a 58-year-old corporation lawyer from New York or a 5-year-old from Moscow. You went to immersion school and learned Hebrew. Because until you knew Hebrew, whether you were the child or the corporation lawyer, you really couldn't participate in the culture or the commerce of the nation. I think that kids who don't know English are at a distinct disadvantage, and I think that we ought to do everything possible to allay that, to alleviate that as early as possible. Young kids are sponges. To me, it makes no sense not to put them into an immersion situation. They ought to keep the other language. That's, I think, a rich cultural treasure, and they ought to work at keeping it. But they ought not to be instructed in it.
Hi, I'm Jacqueline Newmeyer. I'm a freshman at the college from Washington, D.C. And my question is, while clearly the adoption of accountability standards will serve the interests of parents who are justifiably concerned about the quality of schools, is there a way to address the problem of the great proportion of parents who don't care, parents for whom academic achievement and education aren't a guiding value?
That's a very good and a very perceptive question, because it is the most difficult thing to do. But I think the answer is that if you have a school where you have a strong principal and otherwise an active parental involvement, that there is a considerable rub-off, that it is a very different environment altogether for the child than a school where, I'll give you an example, in the inner city of Los Angeles, where a third of the kids were never going to classes. A new principal came in. It took him many years, but now that is a model school because he insisted on attendance and went out and actually called upon the parents to do it. Now, he's extraordinary. But that's the kind of thing that has to occur. And one of the things that we have to deal with is truancy. If kids aren't in school, they can't learn. And ours aren't in school enough, even those that go all the time. They go about 180 days, or they will by the end of this year in California. Now it's 172. They're going to be competing with Asian and European kids who are going 200, 220 instructional days a year. They're not challenged in the same way. But your question is very good. It's part of a larger question. And we could get into it, but the thing that frightens me more than any weapons of mass destruction or anything else is the fact that we have seen in a 50-year period an escalation in the out-of-wedlock birth rate in the United States from 1 in 25 to 1 in 3. In the inner city, it's 7, 8, 9, 10. Kids don't know who their father was. Fatherless America is at a horrible disadvantage. The statistics are beyond dispute. There isn't any question as to what happens. We've got to do something about that. We're trying to do something about it in California with what we call the Partnership for Responsible Parenting. It involves having your kids go to school.
Hi, my name is Lisa Chavez. I'm a graduate student at UC Berkeley in the sociology department, but I'm here at Harvard as an exchange student while I write my dissertation. The California Post-Secondary Education Commission finds that less than 7% or around 7% of Latino high school graduates, so these are high school graduates, are eligible for the University of California. And so among those who are ineligible, the majority of them are ineligible simply because they did not complete the A to F coursework series that University of California requires. Now again, these are high school graduates. And so instead of talking about test scores, I'm wondering why you don't consider a reform that increases, for example, the courses required by all of California's high school graduates. So for example, as of now, we only require 2 years of math in California. The majority of Latinos graduate from high school with only taking Algebra 1, meaning the first year was pre-algebra, the second year was Algebra 1. They graduate from high school virtually locked out of the University of California's doors. And I'm wondering if you could address this coursework issue.
Yes, and we are addressing it in the Standards Commission, and also what we have urged the University of California and the CSU system to do is to not sit in the ivory tower, but to actually go out into the community, work with the high schools, and in fact work with the grade schools. Because now we're hearing a great deal about outreach. Outreach is fine. We want aggressive outreach, but it isn't going to make a great deal of difference if the kids, as you point out, have not been adequately prepared. Social promotion is a major problem. We didn't really even get into that for reasons of time, but it is. And you're right, the standards should require that kids who in fact do want that kind of college work. Others may not. I mean, not everyone wants to do that. They may want vocational, but the kids that do need to take the courses that the university is going to require.
I disagree with the idea of wanting. I would argue that the majority of Latino parents do want their children to go on to school, and in fact the majority of Latino high school students do want to continue college, but because the majority of Latino parents have low levels of education themselves, they're not exactly in the best position to advise their kids to take geometry, to take all these extra courses, and in point of fact, they put a lot of trust in the educational system, and which is why middle-class Californians benefit from this system.
And I agree with you, and that's why I'm saying that the University of California and the CSU system ought to go out to those high schools, go out to the grade schools, go out at preschool. My point is, outreach doesn't begin at high school graduation. It ought to begin at preschool. And if you're the University of California chancellor at a campus, then you have an obligation, in my view, to try to shape the standards for the people that you expect to enter your university.
Yes, thank you. Hello, Governor Wilson. My name is Noah Seaton. My name is Noah Seaton. I'm a sophomore at the college from New York. My question is actually more about the political side of this initiative. A lot of what you outlined was advocated by Bob Dole in the last presidential election, but he got sort of hammered on not being in favor of education. I was wondering what you think the prospects for these reforms are in California, and how that type of reform can be translated to the rest of the country.
At the risk of being rude, I'm going to contradict you. Bob didn't, and if he had, I think, frankly, he would have fared much better. What he said, or at least what people heard from him, was abolish the U.S. Department of Education. I don't think they heard from him the things that we've been talking about today. And I can only tell you that I think if he had talked about those things, he would have gotten a very different response, certainly in my state, because recently the California poll conducted by Mervyn Field about 2 weeks ago reported on a survey that they had done. I didn't know they were doing it. They found widespread discontent on the part of the public with public education. As part of their survey, they asked the public's reaction to all the elements contained in the initiatives that we are seeking to qualify for the November ballot. Overwhelming support for every element of it. I wish Bob had talked about those things, but frankly he didn't. And I think that was the problem. He was perceived, I think, as being anti-education because all people heard was abolish the U.S. Department of Education. What they didn't hear about was what we can do and need to do to improve education.
Hi, Governor. My name is Raphael Mandelman. I'm a student here at the Kennedy School getting a master's in public policy, and I'm also a student at UC Berkeley's Bolt Hall, your law school, where I'm getting a JD. After you left Bolt Hall became a very different school. It became one of the most diverse law schools in the nation, and it trained a generation of black and Latino leadership for California. And there were people who probably did not come into Bolt Hall with test scores that were perhaps as high, all of them, as some of their white counterparts. But they went off, they went to the law firms, they went to their community organizations, and they did fine. Now, this year, after affirmative action has been dismantled at Bolt Hall, there's one black student in a class of about 250. Students at Bolt Hall are concerned that a generation of black and Latino leadership is being lost, and have written an equal educational opportunity initiative that would allow the admissions office at Bolt Hall to consider race among a host of criteria to promote diversity and equal educational opportunity. And I'm wondering if, given the dreadful impact of 209 and the Regent's decisions, if you might not support such an effort until your 20-year program for school improvement works.
No, I wouldn't, and in the unlikely event that it were to qualify, it would be struck down by the Ninth Circuit as being unconstitutional in violation of the Equal Protections Clause of the 14th Amendment. So that's pretty clear. So let me just expand on that. Diversity is a fact of life. California is the most cosmopolitan society in history. We are a nation state of immigrants and proud of it. I say all of us should preserve our heritage. We should all remember we're also Californians. Basically, the Equal Protections Clause insists upon fairness, insists, as did the Civil Rights Act of 1964, that there not be racial discrimination based upon race or gender or ethnicity. Unless you believe, and I hope you don't, that some races are inherently inferior, then you should believe, as I do, that in every race, in every ethnic group, there are legitimate high achievers, and in fact, we have probably benefited more in California than anywhere else, but you don't confer the prize on people, they have to earn it. I am convinced that we are going to have a merit-based system that will be just diverse as it can be, and I think that that is the right way to do it, the healthy way to do it, because then you do not run afoul of the Equal Protections Clause. You do not engage in this artificial manipulation. You award the prize based upon merit. You don't cancel the competition. And when you do that, you also avoid something else, the divisiveness that gave rise to 209 in the first place.
My name's Joel Rosenbaum. I'm a freshman at the college from San Diego. And as a graduate of San Diego Public Schools, I certainly affirm that your reforms are very proactive and needed. But my question would pertain to how we can cut through the emotion, guilt, fear, and racism that often surrounds these issues as they go to the public and actually enact these reforms.
Well, the reforms that I've been talking about tonight have nothing to do with race, except that I think that those who would be the greatest beneficiaries of the reforms are those who are trapped in the worst performing of the schools, who typically are those within the inner city where there is a larger minority enrollment. But what we're talking about tonight would reform a system that is supposed to serve all children in all communities. And unless these reforms take place, frankly, you're going to have more of what we've got now, this terribly erratic quality. In good schools with strong principals, with strong parental involvement, they're going to have good schools. There the children will get a good education. But what about this young lady's question? What about the schools where, in fact, you have the legal immigrant, a very solid citizen who does not have a high education himself, herself? I mean, this university, it would be interesting to find out how many people are graduates of Harvard who are the sons and daughters of immigrants who worked at menial labor to put them through school. It has been the great American immigrant dream. And I will simply say that we ought to keep faith with it. We ought to keep faith with it by assuring that it is a justified expectation on the part of parents who have made that kind of sacrifice. But we're talking about a public school system, for God's sakes, that's paid for by taxes. The only sacrifice that should be made is by, candidly, those who are resisting change, resisting reform, in the interest of protecting those who don't want accountability.
Good evening, Governor. I just want to thank you very much for joining us this evening.
Thank you, sir.
My parents immigrated to this country with me and my two sisters in 1988, and we were very privileged to live in California for 9 years. My question is, do you think there'll be an opportunity in the future for the rest of Americans to benefit from your leadership? And I don't want to put you on the spot, but I want to know more specifically if you're planning on making a run in 2000, if we can look forward to that.
I certainly like the way you phrased the question. I have not been coy at any time. I would love to. Whether I do, whether that interest and that desire materializes into an actual run depends on, first and foremost, whether I could secure the resources to do it. It is an immense undertaking, but I would like to very much. If I can, I will. If I cannot, then I will, I hope, find some other way to continue to involve myself in public policy, because this is a remarkable country. It affords people like me the opportunity to do it. It affords everybody the opportunity to do it if they wish to. Anyway, thank you. I am flattered by your question, and I certainly like the way you phrased it.
Good evening, Governor Wilson. My name is Marvin Tagaban. I'm a sophomore at Harvard College. As we all know, the Internet and the World Wide Web are incredible resources for education. My question deals specifically with your plans to increase online education, specifically with your plans to boost funding for the California Virtual University Project. Could you please respond to some of the criticism that the project has received, that it could erode the traditional campus undergraduate experience based on live interaction between students and professors?
Yes, thank you. I'd be happy to do that. I don't think it will. In fact, I'm confident that it will not erode the residential colleges, residential universities. It is designed really for those who cannot participate at a residential college. It is designed for a great many people who are working and seeking graduate degrees or credit towards a graduate degree. And remote learning, I think, is very much a part of America's future. And I hope so, because it will afford opportunities for people who otherwise simply could not enjoy them. In order to assure that we have a broader audience, we are, in fact, engaging in a program that we call the Digital High School, to assure that every graduate of a California high school will graduate not only literate but computer literate, able to access the Internet with basic computer skills that they're going to need whatever they choose to do, whether they go into the military, whether they go into the job market, whether they go on to college. They need that skill. But the virtual university is not supposed to be, is not intended to be a substitute for a residential college experience. But I think that it will add extraordinarily to the range of educational opportunity for a great many Californians, and not just Californians. Incidentally, of course, the great virtue of this, of the virtual university, it has a worldwide audience.
Pete, thank you, my friend.
They have a remarkable tolerance and courtesy.
And thanks especially to this fine audience. Those are things that make me proud. We do have our views, and you can cheer, but it's better not to groan like, oh. As I said one day, sometimes they bring their own cheerleaders, and then when they speak, why, they groan or go, oh. And that's not the best way to have a public debate. You can clap like hell. I like that. Enough of that. That's just my personal observation. It has nothing to do with the official line of the institution. Pete Wilson is not exactly Wally Wallflower. He is not a faint-hearted fellow. You see that. And remember that initiatives and referendums get passed by human beings. And they get passed by Democrats and Republicans who get fed up with legislators that won't make the tough decisions. Remember how that happens. That's what happens. And it happens in every state. And it will be good when people like you, when you get away from these forums, will go to those who are running for office and put the heat on them, just like you do right here. That is the way democracy works best. And as far as the presidency, well, you remember what Mo Udall said? He said, once you think of running for president, the only way you get it out of your system is with embalming fluid. Thank you, Pete.
Thank you, Al.